Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Katerina Zarniak, and I'm Managing Director of Philanthropy in the Global Philanthropist Circle at Synergos, dialing in this morning from Santa Cruz, California. I'm so happy to welcome you from around the globe to today's session, Emerging from Crisis Through Inclusion, How Diversity and Inclusion Can Build the Future We Want. Insofar as our agenda for our 90 minutes together, we'll start with a plenary before we go into breakout rooms at about 40 past the hour. And each room will be hosted by one of our discussants. We'll then have conversation for 30 minutes before returning to this main room at 10:15. And with that, I will turn it over to the wonderful Marilia Becerra, my fellow Managing Director of Philanthropy and the Global Philanthropist Circle. Thanks again and welcome.
Hello, everybody. Great to be with you. Wonderful to see so many familiar faces. All right. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have you. I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but this might be my favorite conversation with some incredible humans that I am a huge fan of. So I will start just by introducing our speakers. We have with us today Ingrid Srinath, who is the Director of Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University. We have Layne Montgomery, who's Managing Partner of New Profit. And we have Deborah Fries, who is an author and social activist and founding partner of Boston Impact Initiative, amongst other things. I'm Marilia Becerra, and I'll be the facilitator today. And I wanted to just start by centering us in this moment, and kind of coming to a somewhat agreed upon understanding of where we are at as humans in the planet. So really from the macro perspective. So I wanted to invite Deborah, Ingrid, and Layne to introduce themselves beyond the titles that I've just shared, and to share with us, share a Polaroid of how they are seeing this moment in time, and maybe throw in there what might be the opportunities that we have in our hands right now. So how about I start with you, Layne? Would you mind going first?
Not at all. Happy to. Thank you, Marilla, and thank you, everyone, for taking time. Time is so precious, and we're in relationship with that in a particular way right now. So thank you for making the choice and taking the time to be with us. It's really a pleasure to join you. As Marilla said, my name is Layne Montgomery. I'm a managing partner at New Profit. And the snapshot of my mind, some of it you probably don't want to see, but the piece that I'll share this morning that I think will be useful is, I've been thinking that this is really a time that's calling us to revisit the original intention of philanthropy and to take an unfiltered assessment of the impact that philanthropy is having, and to really tell ourselves the truth about where intent and impact are not aligned. So if we think about the original intent of philanthropy, the word philanthropy even derives from the ancient Greek phrase philanthropia, which means to love people. So take a moment to consider that the original intent of the space that we're in is to love people. And so that to me invites a blameless sort of inventory of where impact is aligned with love and where it is outside of love, and what are the practices, beliefs, relationships, and ways of showing up that either bolster or hinder our ability to stand confidently and say that our philanthropy is an act of love. And Octavia Butler, who was one of my favorite authors, if you don't know about her, check her out. She says many great things, but one thing she says that I've been studying a lot lately is that kindness eases change. So the fact that we are in a season of systemic change is undeniable. Every aspect of our life arguably is changing, and kindness can ease the difficulty of that change. It won't eliminate change, but it can ease change. So there's more to talk about later, but I'm really thrilled to be with you all today.
Thank you, Layne. That's really wonderful. Ingrid, could we hear from you? What's the Polaroid of your mind?
I do find myself becoming slightly kinder, and I see a couple of colleagues, ex-colleagues on the call, so I know that will probably be a shock to them. But I think we are poised at a very, very critical juncture in human history. For ourselves, whether you're looking at yourself as an individual, as an organization, as a community, as a nation, or as a species. I think we have, it's like a jigsaw where the pieces are now suddenly in play. Pieces that for a long time were stuck are suddenly mobile. And we have the opportunity to make change on a scale that we've never seen before, certainly in my lifetime. It's not yet clear that we will necessarily make good choices at this point in time. But the choices are available in a way that they haven't been for a long time. I know it's been fashionable, particularly in the early days of the crisis, to say we're all in the same boat. It's absolutely clear already now that we're not all in the same boat, even though we are confronting the same storm. And what we're seeing really is whatever was already in motion, changes that were already in progress, are accelerating at enormous pace. But also that the many, many cleavages that divide us are being exacerbated hugely. Whether these are cleavages of race or ethnicity or religion or gender or class or any of them. And they've been made visible in a way that is quite dramatic. Certainly in India, I think for a lot of people of privilege, elites, it's the first time they're noticing what the lives of the people that serve them, that cook their food, that wash their clothes, that take care of their children, that drive their cars. I think for many people, it's the first time they're actually getting in touch with what these people, who they depend on for their productivity, for their comfort, for their existence in some cases, what those lives are really like. I think we're seeing a lot of balances shift, a lot of equilibriums be disrupted. And as I said, we have the opportunity here to make some very, very big choices. So let's hope there's enough of us on the side of progressive choices as opposed to some really bad trends that are also in evidence, particularly with authoritarian governments seeking more power, executive branches seeking more power over, the other arms of government, business seeking to reduce environmental and labor protections. So we have some pretty grave threats to deal with. And like I said, it's up to us really which way we're going to go down at that intersection that we're at.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. I really love the metaphor. It's just perfect. I haven't heard it before, that we are not all in the same boat, it's the same storm. And I'm keeping that one. It's very helpful.
It's not mine. I just stole it from somewhere. I don't remember.
Thank you for sharing today, though. Deborah, can I pass it on to you so we can see with your eyes?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'm going to pick up on where Ingrid was with the critical juncture that she mentioned, because my background has been in studying complex adaptive systems. And the question that I've been in is, how do we know when a system has actually fallen apart, right? We have moments where we see it not working for so many of us, and yet the system keeps going. And for those who study complex adaptive systems, we learn that a chaos cycle gets triggered by significant changes in the external environment that forces the system to abandon its old way and respond to the new. And as the system descends into chaos, and I think, we've had moments before, for sure, where we've all experienced various levels of chaos. Right now, I think we all know that we're in chaos. It's not a question. We all know that we're in chaos, and we hit this bifurcation point, a system, whether it's ecological system, political system, technological system, it hits a bifurcation point, at which point it has choices, and it can reorganize using new beliefs and structures and values, and that work well in the changed environment, or it can insist on its old ways and fail to reorganize and ultimately die. And that's, again, that's coming from sort of like a complex systems view, studying ecology, et cetera. So what does that mean for us right now, right? As we look at this question of the chaos that's generated by COVID, which is casting a light on the underlying order of our global economic and social systems, right? And revealing the fundamental fragility and inequality that is baked into them across the globe. And of course, we know the side of ourselves, of human nature, of many people who will move to enforce and strengthen the form of the system that we have today. In fact, create a further evolution of what you might call a kind of surveillance capitalism that continues to preference elites and support banks and billionaires and airlines and bail out those folks. And then there's this extraordinary emergence happening as well, right? Where we are maybe willing to trailblaze a new path. And the question for me, and it goes actually to what Layne was saying about love, it has to do with the fundamental underlying beliefs about, are we separate, selfish, and competitive by nature? Or are we interdependent, generous, and loving by nature? And I think we know part of this bifurcation, which is an expression to some degree of sort of patriarchy gone too far and bringing back into balance. We don't throw out the fact that we have competition in us, we have self-interest in us, we have separation in us, but we also have relationship and interdependence and love and kindness. And when we start to call that path backward to us, I think we have an opportunity to step down this pandemic as portal, as many of us heard that Arundhati Roy quote, walk through the portal into something different. All the pressure to me is to keep us where we are. That is also the nature of a system, no judgment. A system is inclined towards self-preservation. It will do what it can to maintain itself. But we are in this moment of like pregnant chaos filled with possibility where we might actually go through that portal, go down that bifurcation path in a different way, but it requires intent. It doesn't just happen to us. And I think that's this moment. I sort of sit at this crossroads saying, I have absolutely no idea which way we'll go. I know which way I'm called to go. I know which way I want to find others to travel with, but this is this grand mystery we're in right now. It's an extraordinary moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that we have the word inclusion in our title, right? But we actually started our conversation from love, from connection, and I think that's where I want to go next with all of you. So is it a hole that we fall into, or is it a portal, right? And I think no one here will pretend to know what the trend is just yet. So what might be the tools or what might be the skills, what might be the perspectives that we need to hold in order for us to step from the fragility, the inequality, and the injustice of past systems, the current fragility, right? Which I think is really remarkable. What you said, Ingrid, too, that what this virus has done is that it has made seemingly intractable systems get disrupted. But what might be the skills? What might be the ways, the things that we need to bring with us as we are stepping into the construction and the creation of this new paradigm, really? And I would open to any of you who wants to jump in.
I'll go first. And I think what I see as sort of green shoots or, you know, things that we could try and nurture in the current context is I'm hearing much more, and I'm seeing much more collaboration and genuine partnership. In India, where we've had, it's been practically impossible to build coalitions of philanthropists, for example, or to build really genuine partnerships between groups of philanthropists and civil society organizations, or between government and civil society. I mean, civil society had a shock when the ministries that have actually been most hostile to them in recent years suddenly wrote to all of us with the salutation, "Dear friend." I mean, nobody was expecting those ministries to ever address us as "dear friend." We're seeing remarkable collaborations, really unlikely partners, unlikely allies come together in ways that we've never seen before. And I think that's one, the ability to collaborate, but also partnerships based on actual mutual respect. I heard a philanthropist say last week that his big learning and he's been one of the most active in the crisis, his big learning was just how remarkable nonprofits and the people that work in nonprofits are, how courageous, how compassionate, the risks they take, the hours they work, the labor. He's been a philanthropist for decades. This is this fundamental realization from observing this up close for the first time. So I think that the ability to build collaboration, the ability to convene across divides, the ability to translate across divides in a way that makes people work together better, I think is critical. The second one is, I think, the sense of privilege and abundance that so many of us are suddenly in touch with. I mean, I'm deeply grateful that I'm at home with my family, that my mother's less than a block away, and that I can stay in touch with her because I have colleagues who are not. I mean, a colleague, a person on my team lost their grandfather yesterday, but were unable to be at his funeral or be with their family at this time because we don't have, all travel is locked down. So I think that the deep realization of our privilege among elites of various kinds is another thing that we really can build something from, that we can actually leverage, if you will, into something, into change. There is, I hope, a realization also that we are actually as vulnerable as the weakest member of our society. I mean, Gandhi said this many years ago to a friend who had written to him asking for advice. He was, you know, how will you make choices? He said, recall the face of the poorest and the most helpless man whom you may have seen and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him. Will he be able to gain anything by it? Will it restore to him a control over his own life and destiny? And that will be your talisman. So I think that sense of abundance, that sense of privilege that we're suddenly in touch with, I think is something that we can leverage for positive change. And the third one is agency. I have never seen so many ordinary citizens across the world take charge of these problems and address them. I mean, these are not trained social workers, these are not trained health workers, and yet across the world you see stories of people reaching out to the elderly in their community, reaching out to the unwell in their neighborhoods, reaching out to put together emergency aid for people. There is, I mean, children, working class people, even very poor people are doing, so that sense of, I think, agency that people have, that they can make change happen, that they don't have to wait for someone to lead them, or they don't have to wait for someone to direct them, or they don't have to wait for a protocol to be given to them, that they can simply take charge of change and drive it themselves, are three of the factors that I think are going to be critical going forward.
That's great. Absolutely. Who wants to piggyback on that one? To Layne, I see you unmuted.
I'm happy to just offer, I really, there's so much about what you just said, Ingrid, that I'm excited about digging into in a smaller group. So there's a lot, I believe, that we, this audience and our networks can do. One thing I would encourage us to do is really train ourselves and our organizations to take a comprehensive view of systems and to sort of disabuse ourselves of the myth that if you're doing rigorous, high impact, high potential, cutting edge work, you are focusing solely on matters of capital, strategy, technology, and practice. That matters, that's critical. However, we have to sort of strengthen our muscles and expand our aperture to also put a steady focus on power dynamics, relationships, mental models, and beliefs. And it is not one category of focus versus the other. It is the integration of a comprehensive view across what we call the 6 conditions of systems change. And there's a really powerful article called The Water of Systems Change, published by FSG, that I'm drawing from, where the 6 conditions of systems change are articulated. And I do believe that what we must do is build our ability to really consider all 6 conditions. And again, the ones we tend to focus on most are the structural conditions, the policy, practices, and resource flows. Where we pay less attention, or often tell ourselves lies, frankly, is in that sort of middle tier of relational change, power dynamics, and relationships and connections. Who do we go to as trusted advisors? What are the models of leadership that we hold in high regard? What are the criteria that we impose on grantees and partners that we may not even articulate to ourselves, never mind make explicit to people who we say we want to serve? So doing a real, like a ruthless inventory of the relationships that we hold and trust and the dynamics that we instill and benefit from is a critical piece of what we all need to get better at in this moment. And then finally, underneath all of it, undergirding all of it, is what we call mental models, beliefs. You know, where do we believe expertise, genius, and talent reside? How attached are we to creating a table where people who talk and think differently than we do have meaningful power and influence to shape design? These are the kinds of exercises and abilities that we need to get better at collectively in order to really shift systems. I don't believe there is a technological innovation that in isolation of a broad view will actually address the opportunity that sits before us right now.
Amazing. Yes, Deborah, and I know you'll be excited to piggyback onto that.
Of course, thank you to Layne and Ingrid. The mental models and beliefs, you know, I think that what's called for, this question of how do we approach this moment, what tools do we need, is a question about, you know, Ingrid, you just spoke about everyone stepping forward in small ways, as they do every time there's a crisis. Small acts distributed throughout the system happen all the time. They're natural to our human nature. And yet we have a dominant system that concentrates wealth and power. And the answer is the redistribution of wealth and power. That is what's natural. This concentration of wealth and power in response to ordinary life and in response to crisis from the top is the fundamental mental model and belief of the dominant system that is failing all of us. And so when I look at the question of where do we get our ideas about how we walk down an unknown path, and every historical dominant system has collapsed, and now we've got the one we've got. It's not been sustainable. It's not been responsive. There is only one system that has responded to systems collapse again and again and again for 3.8 billion years successfully, which is nature. And so when I think about what path do we go down, I take a page out of the book of the biomimicry folks. So those are the folks who study nature to get answers to how can we design human systems based on the one brilliant model that's truly out there and works. And then it says to me things like, okay, nature redistributes resources. Nature invests in the whole ecosystem. Nature is compelled toward biodiversity. When we think about, let's go to this question of philanthropy, investing, economy, we do all the opposite. We concentrate wealth, we invest in our pet projects, we make sure that our resources live in perpetuity in a form of concentration. And what would it look like to pursue a path in relationship to finance, wealth, and power that was following nature's lead. So there's a lot more we can say about that. We can talk about that in the breakout room. But for me, at this moment of feeling lost at times, I'm like, okay, go back to nature. What does she have to teach me? How do I design risk, return, distribution of capital, grants, recoverable, the whole thing with nature as my guide?
That's brilliant. And I think, folks, just a reminder that you can put some questions into the chat if you have them, and that you are going to get to benefit from a longer and deeper conversation with the speakers in just a moment. So I'm wondering, I thought I would check with the three of you. Are there any questions that you would have for each other? And you don't have to, but just checking and seeing whether you do. I think we're good. Great. So, oh, you do.
Is that fine, really?
Yes. Yes, please, please.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many. I'm so excited to be in conversation with both of you for many reasons, and hope it will continue. I mean, so Deborah, when you talk about, you know, really powerful, right? That the one system that has, you know, sustained through chaos, adaptation, you know, depletion, et cetera, is nature. And we operate in, you know, polar opposite in terms of the core values in philanthropy, but, you know, social impact investing, and just as a society, really, kind of across every dimension. My question is, the mental model, the shift that nature is our guide. I can already imagine that for many of us who are deeply trained and immersed in the sort of analytic frameworks that give us credibility and legitimacy in these spaces of power, privilege, and resource, right? Like the more, yeah, you understand my point. I see you nodding. So how, you know, how do you encourage us to explore what would be a very different mental model of really looking to nature as a source of expertise and example when we think about things like investment and philanthropy, which is, you know, we like to go very cerebral and traditional and tested when it's time to make decisions with our money. We kind of turn away from nature when it's time to make decisions with our money. How do you encourage us to take steps towards shifting our foundational mental model?
I think it's a great question. And again, I really follow very much in the lead of Janine Benyus, who's taught people with technology and innovation to use nature as their model. So people are coming from engineering. Look, if the engineers can do it, we can do it, right? So you know, her practice is she teaches and trains people, and every time you're confronted by a problem, the one question you ask again and again and again is, what would nature do in this circumstance? And so when I think about it, I like to use my place. I live in New England. I live in Boston with a mature ecosystem, hardwood forests. There's oak trees out my door. And I think, okay, what does the oak tree do? The oak tree does not consume all of the water in the ecosystem. The fact that the oak tree has roots that goes deeper down and can tap more water than anybody else, that should sound a little bit like big banks and maybe big philanthropy. And yet, instead of taking all the water, it releases the water and brings it to those plants that can least access it. And in fact, if the environment changes in such a way that the oak tree's life is threatened and doesn't fit the environment anymore, it chooses to die and distribute its resources. It's the opposite of too big to fail. So I don't know, this is a lifelong practice. It's not like you can change your mental model overnight, but the practice of saying everything, like, you know, in my work, we've designed every financial instrument we created. I run an impact investing fund, I should say. We've designed every financial instrument we've created with that question of what would nature do? Where should returns be built? How does nature manage risk? How does nature manage return? How does nature manage liquidity, you know? So there's not a lot out there, but there's some out there. And I think every time I've asked the question to explore it, this rich range of answers and explorations, and it's fundamentally a journey of curiosity. So by the way, go to just asknature.org is a good place to start.
It's the practice of asking the questions, the good questions. So So if I can kind of narrow us in a bit, and we have been talking about, we as this culture and society has been talking about diversity and inclusion for decades and decades, and yet in comes a virus, a shared storm, and never have we before, as Ingrid, you were pointing out, we are seeing each other and we are experiencing the challenges in different ways, which is showing us that we haven't come nearly far enough. We are definitely not there. We haven't been there, but we've been talking about inclusion and diversity for a long, long time. What might we have been missing in this conversation? And what is it that we need to bring into it? Perhaps even how do we step outside of it altogether into a new frame of thought in order for us to actually really emerge from this crisis as nature does. Interconnectedness is the organizing principle of life in this planet. So how do we organize ourselves around that? So what needs to change in the way we look at, we talk about, and we embody this conversation around inclusion and diversity in order for us to make this a portal moment? Who would like to take that?
I'll jump in. I mean, we'll give it a shot. There's so much to do. I'd say the top lines for me are: one, we have to build regard and familiarity with excellence and power that we're not typically in the company of. So an example, in the US, in education reform movements, there has been a long-standing set of policy and practices that at best treat family and parents as a sort of a begrudging, partner, and at worst treat parents and families like a nuisance. So if I am running a school, if I am running a school district, and I have a bold reform agenda that I want to put in place that focuses on student outcomes, there's a long history of a set of policies and practices that treat the families and parents as if they are, afterthought, irritation, annoyance, the thing that the child must be educated away from, right? And what that mental model has resulted in is a deeply crippled capacity on the part of some segments of ed reform to recognize the tremendous power, expertise, and capacity that exists in families and communities, right? So design is driven by deficit in a way that means so much resource is missed. And part of what we are now starting to acknowledge is, oh no, I'm big. Hello, everybody. What we're now starting to acknowledge is that there is no policy, philanthropic intervention, technology creation that in isolation of enrollment from community can actually advance sustained, efficient social impact. Like, we actually need the expertise and buy-in of communities, families, and people who we often have defined solely by the suffering that we see, by the comparison that we do of them to us, and by bias, frankly, and a set of stories about, can someone who was raised poor be a brilliant leader and innovator? We have to really get honest with ourselves about what our question is, what our answer is to that. And even if individually we have one answer, our policies reflect another set of beliefs. So I do believe we really need to get better fast at recognizing and having proximity to the people that we want to support and partner with. We don't really have that. And then also having real regard for the expertise of proximity. It's not just about have a lot of friends who live and look different than you. It's about how are you guided, changed, informed, led, and taught by people who are living a set of experiences that you want to influence in one way or the other.
Sorry, would Deborah or Ingrid like to add on to that?
Sure, I'd be happy to go next. I think some of the questions that are coming through are, who are you talking to in the first place? Who's at the table? I've been in conversations recently where just changing that dynamic has completely disrupted those rigid stances that we all come into these meetings with. We all know what we know, and that's not going to change, just because I'm in a collaborative setting. But to mix it up. I mean, I was in a conversation where you had ethicists and philosophers and economists and historians and corporate people. Suddenly, when we were talking about CSR, we were not talking about CSR as legislated in India, where I could have predicted everybody's statement, but we were taking CSR back to the East India Company. And what do we learn from history that could inform? So I think just changing the makeup of the room is huge, and to ensure that the people at the table are the people with the greatest stake in that change happening, rather than the people with the most money necessarily, or the longest titles. I think another thing a philanthropist said to us last week was, we have to give up our obsession with how much and start to think about much more about how. The modes of engaging. She is finding that just putting herself into a deep listening position vis-a-vis her grantees has fundamentally altered her philanthropy, as opposed to coming at this with the technocratic, we know how this is done, we just need to find the partners that agree with us and write them checks and forget about it. I think the third one is to really articulate what values are being prioritized. For too long, we have let this business mindset of productivity and efficiency dictate the terms in philanthropy and civil society, and in society more generally. Just putting that on the table and say, is efficiency more important than justice? Let's have a conversation about that. So which values are we going to prioritize? What are the criteria by which we're going to evaluate solutions? I think are some of the things that need to change going forward, if you're going to make a real difference.
Thank you, Ingrid. Deborah, we have about another minute or so before we're going to go into breakout rooms, but we'd love to hear from you.
Sure, I think it's very similar to what both Ingrid and Layne said, and I want to pick up on Layne's idea of proximity, which I really appreciate. A mentor of mine named Peter Block once said to me as we were trying to do work in the Global South, he said, help is an act of aggression. And I was like, what are you talking about? Help is well-intended. It was deliberately provocative, but the idea was, if we go in as I know I have, and you don't know, and you don't have, and I'm going to fix things for you. That's what he was speaking about as an act of aggression. And that is absolutely necessary when people truly are victims. But a vast majority of our work in philanthropy is working with people who aren't victims, who have agency, who have resources, who have wisdom, and then we still impose our intervention. And so I think the invitation is a shift from intervention, I know you don't know, and I will help you, to friendship, which is a relationship of mutuality, reciprocity, and trust, where we co-create solutions, recognizing that resources are inequitably distributed, and we need to distribute those differently, but we don't need to take all the power and decide what we do for others.
Thank you, Deborah, to Layne and Ingrid. And how lucky are we all that we get to spend some more time with these three phenomenal humans. So what's going to happen now is that you are going to be directed to a breakout room. There will be a little window that pops on your screen if you haven't done that yet. And you're just gonna click and go into your breakout room. And then Deborah, Layne, and Ingrid each will be in a room, and you get to have a discussion with them. After that, we're gonna come back here for a sum up and close.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for staying on. I hope you enjoyed your breakout sessions. It looks like we're still welcoming a few back. Let everyone come back into the main room. So for our last little bit of time here, we're going to turn back to our speakers to have them share a bit out from what came up in their breakout rooms. And so Ingrid, I'll actually start with you when we were in the same breakout room together.
So we chose to focus on what reasons do we have to be optimistic at this time about big change being possible, about historical injustices being addressed, about a new collective consciousness. And some of the things that people listed were the fact that reality is now visible, that we're not cut off from the day-to-day reality for most people. The second one was technology and its use finally really as, or the possibility of its use finally as a great leveler rather than a great divider. A sense of urgency that is unprecedented. A sense of real value for the people that do the most valuable work, whether that's teachers or healthcare workers or frontline retail people or service industry people, a sense of real value for that work certainly, and hopefully for those workers as well. And yet there was also the large scale disruption, the scale of the disruption in the business models, in the social models, and the fact that these, they're now impossible to ignore. So whether you look at food systems or education or public health or any of these, you're seeing such sweeping disruption that it is impossible to just go back to business as usual quite as easily as we did the last time, which was after the financial crisis, when we actually made things much precipitously worse instead of precipitously better. And yet, for those of us that are not congenital optimists, there was a lot of questions around how do we make sure that it's different this time? How do we ensure that the complacency that we had last time, which was, the sense that, oh, well, now everybody gets it, so now we don't need to fight anymore. And how do we prevent that from sort of lulling us into some false sense of security that then allows the very well organized and very well resourced forces that are desperate to get us back to business as usual. And some of the ideas that we talked about to prevent that from happening was really focusing on changing the norms. To really, if there's to building the networks, changing the norms, fashioning a new narrative. So norms, networks, and narratives is our mantra that we came up with in that breakout room. Thank you to everyone who was there. And to Kate.
Thank you, Ingrid. That's a perfect summary. To Layne, can I turn over to you next?
Happy to. I love, Ingrid, that you and your group came up with a alliteration, norms, networks, and narrative. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I'm going to use it. So our group, we talked about, I was trying to see if I could quickly come up with the mantra. In another life, I was a MC, so couldn't quite do it though. I mean, maybe I would say instead of location, relationships. That's going to be my takeaway, because we spoke a lot about just what does it mean to pay real attention to dynamics of power in relationships. We spoke about, like, okay, inclusion is an interesting word. What does it actually look like? What does it look like to build spaces and environments that actually advance inclusion? What does it look like to actually build relationships that operate differently? We talked a fair amount, about the idea of what does it mean to create spaces where people we're partnering with, organizations, communities, can actually explicitly say what they're experiencing at our hand, right? So earlier we talked about it's possible to be data-driven, yet ignorant of the assets and needs in the communities we seek to support and serve. In fact, it's likely that we can be data-driven, research-informed, and yet wildly ignorant about what communities need. So how do we combat that? We all agree that that's true. That's a risk that we're all susceptible to. How do we combat that? Through relationships that enable and allow people who have been negatively impacted by our well-intended policies to tell the truth about those impacts. We talked about what does it take to build multiracial coalitions in a way that is genuine and doesn't require people of color to sort of perform and be perceived as, you know, sort of easy, right? Like, how can we create spaces where there's space for talking about the stuff that's hard? I mean, again, you know, some of the most well-intended practices that we've all been part of have caused real harm. And yet there hasn't been a lot of space to name that without there being negative consequence for funding and investment. So we did spend a fair amount of time talking about the sort of features and traits of spaces that allow for unfiltered truth-telling without negative consequence. We talked a bit about how truth-telling is important if the goal is equity, because first you have to have unfiltered truth-telling, then you can have reconciliation, then redesign, then equity. So if that's the pathway that we're on, you know, telling the truth actually really matters, even though it is a seemingly simple thing to engage. We also had folks talk about how these big dynamics play out in our individual lives, in our neighborhoods. One person talked about, you know, I know how easy it is for me to ask my neighbor, what do you need? But how hard it is for me to answer that same question, what do I need? And so how can we just get better at creating relationships that support and spaces that allow people to say what they need to thrive in their set agenda or set priorities. So we did talk more on the sort of implicit aspects of systems change. We talked a little bit less about policies and resource allocation, but we did talk a lot about power dynamics, relationship, and what it really requires of us as philanthropists and, you know, friends of the movement to create relationships and spaces that facilitate transformation.
Thank you so much, Layne. All right, Deborah, I'll turn to you last.
Thanks, Kate. So we did go a little bit further with biomimicry and finance, and we talked about place-based investing and what it means to bring some of that wisdom from nature into investing structures, which also led to a question, again, of going deeper into the distribution of wealth and power and each of our roles in that. Like, what does it mean if wealth and power is concentrated and it needs to flow like nature? What does that look like for any of us to make choices about how we show up, what rooms we're in, who we invite into those rooms, who's not in the room, and what agency do we have to do something with that? That also connected in a bit with impact measurement. So what is it that we're measuring? Who's deciding? What voice do the people who are being measured have in shaping those metrics, saying for themselves, instead of compliance with the grantor or the investor, saying, this is how I want to grow my enterprise. This is how I want to measure myself. How could I feed that back to you? And we share in that. And then a really interesting question came up that started from the question of how do we relate to things like unpaid care work, around the distinction between transactional culture and gift culture, and whether we are seeking to bring everything that operates in gift culture and make it paid and transactional, or whether there's space to honor that we need beautiful spaces of gift culture that are not all about transaction, and yet that's nested inside a big economic transactional system. How do we be in that curiosity, that exploration, and honor the care work that isn't paid without our first instinct being necessarily to pay it? So how do we hold the integrity there? So really good questions and conversation that I'd love to explore further.
Nice. Thanks so much. All right, Marilia, I will now punt it to you for a wrap up and taking this home.
I think I want to start by saying how much I learned today. And that having you all here, the speakers and all of you participating, gives me personally a lot of energy and hope. I wanna share a comment I made in the breakout that I think might be valuable to us out here as well, which is the fact that usually when you have a panel, you get all the speakers beforehand, and you have a conversation around what we're going to talk about. You get a pre-alignment. And for many reasons, logistical reasons, this ended up not happening for this panel. And yet, we got these three speakers who do not know each other, who are reimagining the world in such alignment with one another in 3 places of the world, right? That too is something that gives me a lot of hope, because we are carefully looking and seeing the same thing, maybe from slightly different angles, but there is such an alignment in the understanding of what was, what were the historical systemic barriers that have kept us from building, co-creating a more loving, compassionate, interconnected world. There's also common understanding on what this moment brings and the opportunity it brings, without naivety and without just going kumbaya, we're done. We already done this in the last financial crisis, as Ingrid, I think, was the one mentioning that. So how do we take this moment really with the joy that an opportunity to transform something that has, again, been seemingly intractable for so long and so unjust? How do we use this moment where we all get to be under the same storm to get to what's next, and may the next be something a lot more loving, to be honest. I think, to Layne, you opened up with love. I think love is relationship. Love is, interconnectedness as the organizing principle of life in the planet is manifested through love in so many ways. So I'm just feeling very honored to be a part of this conversation, and a conversation that will continue. And we invite you to continue it with us and within your other networks. Let's think norms, networks, and narratives. Let's think relationship. So how do we continue the conversation? A few things will happen. You will, first of all, have access to the recording of this virtual gathering. We'll be sharing that with you. I think Layne has mentioned she might have a report that she wants to share. We might want to share with you the bridge span Echo and Green one as well. Deborah, Ingrid, if you guys have things that you want us to share with this group, just let us know. We'll pack it up together and make a nice little gift to offer. And then you can also continue a conversation through joining us in future sessions. There is a website and with all the different conversations we are having. Please come back. Let's keep seeing each other, being with each other, connecting with each other, challenging each other, so we can step into this transformation with agency and get where we want to get, not where we don't want to get. Let me see, I'm checking to see if there is anything else that I need to say from a production side. I think I don't. We have 1 more minute to go, and I want to just take this last minute to express our gratitude, our team's gratitude to all of you, particularly to the generosity of Layne, Ingrid, and Deborah today. And it's been a real pleasure to be with you, and more to come. Thank you, everyone.